Penguin Random House Canada Audio presents The Down Goes Brown History of the NHL, the world's most beautiful sport, the world's most ridiculous league, by Sean Mcindoe. Read for you by the author. Introduction. It's not just you. This league has always been a little bit off. The NHL is a weird league. Every hockey fan has had this thought. One moment you're in awe of the speed, skill, and intensity that define the sport, shaking your head as a player makes an impossible play, shatters a record, or sobs into his first Stanley Cup. The next, everyone's wearing earmuffs, Mr. Rogers is showing up, and guys in yellow raincoats are officiating playoff games. That's just life in the NHL, a league that can't seem to get out of its own way. No matter how long you've been a hockey fan, you've known the sinking feeling that maybe, just maybe, some of the people in charge here don't always know what they're doing. And at some point, you've probably wondered, was it always like this? The short answer is yes. As for the longer answer, that's this book. I was born in Australia and lived in California until I was almost 5, so when it came to being a hockey fan, I had some catching up to do. Once I arrived in Canada, it didn't take me long to fall in love with the game, and by the time the Islanders dynasty was giving way to Wayne Gretzky and the Oilers, I was hooked. I dove into the game's history, reading anything I could get my hands on and listening to older fans tell the stories of the legends who had come before my time. But there was another half of the fan experience, and it was one I didn't often see reflected in the reference books I signed out of the school library. This part came in bits and pieces, from throwaway lines in Sunday columns and rambling stories from late-night sports radio callers and offhand anecdotes by color commentators late in blowouts. And it seemed to send a clear message. The game's history was filled with epic stories of dramatic moments and heroic performances, to be sure. But there was also plenty of weird stuff that happened in between. Once I hit my 40s and was able to make a career out of writing about hockey, that's the kind of stuff I made sure to mention. To this day, I'll drop in a passing reference to some strange moment or circumstance and find that readers often have no idea what I'm talking about. Some assume I'm joking. Others accuse me of making stuff up. I'm not. The NHL has featured so many weird side notes over the years that the story doesn't feel complete without them. That's where this book comes in. The idea here is to trace the history of the NHL from its earliest days as a 4-team organization that almost immediately shrank to 3 when an arena fire left one team homeless, to its current iteration as a multi-billion-dollar monstrosity. We'll look at the story from a fan's perspective, from yours and mine, and cover the best, the worst, and especially the downright odd. This book is about the moments that brought you out of your seat, but also the ones that left you just shaking your head, because Lord knows the NHL has given us plenty of both. To tell that tale, we'll have to go back to the start, more than a century ago. Chapter 1. In the Beginning. Let's all start a hockey league, but not with that guy. Our story begins the way all the truly great ones do, with a bunch of guys sitting around trying to figure out how to ditch the loser in the group that nobody likes. By 1917, the year the NHL was born, there had already been several attempts to form professional ice hockey leagues in North America with varying degrees of success. The Western Pennsylvania Hockey League had become the first to pay some of its players in 1902, and soon it morphed into the International Professional Hockey League, the sport's first fully professional circuit. The IPHL didn't last long, running from 1904 to 1907, but it spawned plenty of imitators. In those early years, the Eastern Canada Amateur Hockey Association had emerged as the sport's most successful league. Success in those days was relative, and like most of the era's leagues, the ECAHA struggled through financial challenges and team instability. The league lasted 4 seasons until 1909, when a dispute broke out involving its most successful franchise. The Montreal Wanderers had won 3 ECAHA titles, but new owner P.J. Doran announced his intention to move them to the Jubilee, a smaller rink that he also happened to own. The other owners objected, and the infighting led to them forming a new league, called the Canadian Hockey Association, without Doran or his team. Needless to say, this didn't sit especially well with the Wanderers. In response, they formed their own league to compete with the CHA. Jimmy Gardner, the Wanderers' former star player and soon-to-be coach, approached an industrialist named Ambrose O'Brien, whose application to join the CHA with a team in Renfrew, Ontario, had been rejected. The two quickly put together a rival league, named it the National Hockey Association, and granted 4 franchises at their initial meeting on December 2nd, 1909. Days later, the fledgling NHA and CHA both held organizing meetings at the Windsor Hotel in Montreal. Merger overtures were made, but the CHA rejected any such talk. That turned out to be a mistake. Within weeks, the CHA folded, and 2 of its franchises were absorbed by the NHA. The new league, now featuring 7 teams, began play in January. Over the next 5 years, despite the challenge of a world war and competition from the rival Pacific Coast Hockey Association, the NHA was able to establish itself as hockey's premier league, featuring franchises that would later become the Ottawa Senators and Montreal Canadiens. But by 1915, the fledgling league had a problem, and its name was Eddie Livingston. Livingston came to own both of the league's Toronto teams, the Blue Shirts and the Ontarios, the latter of which would later be renamed the Shamrocks. The rest of the NHA's owners didn't like the idea of both Toronto franchises being owned by the same man, let alone one as prickly as Livingston. As Darcy Jenisch describes him in his excellent 2013 book, The NHL, A Centennial History, Livingston had the gentle demeanor of a pastor, but the fastidious personality of a tax collector or customs agent. Livingston continuously struggled to find enough players to fill both rosters, which led to the demise of the Shamrocks in 1915. But even with their chief issue seemingly resolved, the league's troubles with the Toronto owner were hardly over. There were arguments over player rights, including an aborted trade of star Cy Dennedy, and accusations that the team played too rough a style. Tensions were high enough that Canadiens owner George Kennedy occasionally tried to fight Livingston. The two never did come to blows, as far as we know, which was probably good news for Livingston given Kennedy's background as a professional wrestling promoter. By November 1917, the rest of the NHA had finally had enough and voted to suspend the Blue Shirts franchise. When Livingston responded by suing the NHA, the rest of its owners came up with a novel solution. They shut down the entire league. And then, days later, they started a new one. In a meeting, once again at the Windsor, on November 26, 1917, the National Hockey League was formed. At the time, legendary hockey writer Elmer Ferguson asked Kennedy if Livingston had been invited to join the new league. "I guess we forgot," the Canadiens owner deadpanned. The new NHL was, in the eyes of the man who created it, just a stopgap until Livingston dropped his lawsuit and they could reform the NHA. They gave it a year or 2 at most. It featured 5 teams: the Canadiens, Senators, Wanderers, Quebec Bulldogs, and a new team in Toronto that didn't yet have a name, but did fulfill the league's key requirement for acceptance: not being owned by Eddie Livingston. The Bulldogs, in true early 20th century hockey fashion, didn't make it to opening night, leaving the league to take the ice with 4 teams. The very first games in NHL history were played on December 19, 1917, as the league debuted with a pair of contests. In Montreal, the Wanderers held on to beat Toronto by a final score of 10-9, with defenseman Dave Ritchie scoring the first goal in league history just a minute into the action. In addition to its historical importance, the game stands to this day as the greatest win in the Wanderers' entire NHL history. Unfortunately, as we'll see in a moment. Meanwhile, the league's other Montreal franchise was earning a win of its own in Ottawa. The Canadiens topped the Senators 7-4 in front of a packed house of 6,000 fans. That win featured 5 goals from Phantom Joe Malone, who would soon emerge as the league's first superstar by scoring 44 goals in just 20 games. For years, it was an open question as to which of these 2 games was actually the league's first, since official start times weren't well documented back then. But according to recent research by hockey historian Randy Boswell, the contest in Montreal earned first game honors by about half an hour, owing partly to a last-minute contract dispute between Senators players and management that saw 2 Ottawa stars, Hamby Shore and Jack Dara, fail to agree to terms and join the game until after the first period was over. Yes, the NHL didn't even make it to its first opening face-off without a labor dispute. As those 2 final tallies attest, those early games tended to be high-scoring. The league averaged just under 10 goals per game in its first season. Part of that was due to the era's goalies who wore tiny pads and weren't anywhere near as big or athletic as their modern counterparts. They also weren't very skilled. Early scoring star Babe Dye's signature move was simply to get a hard shot away quickly. That was enough to allow him to rack up repeated 30-goal seasons and to regularly score from his own side of the red line against flustered goalies who hadn't seen the puck coming.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?